Good morning, everyone. I don't normally do this, but there's a cute girl in class today. I want to ask out after church, so. Turn down again. What can I say? Did everybody get a copy of the class material? If you didn't, raise your hand, and somebody besides me will run out and get you a copy. I'd like to thank Anna Lois and friends for getting it copied. It's one of the advantages of using material I wrote 25 years ago is the numbers are already, or the pages are already numbered. You have all the information already, and I'm not handing them out all through the semester or quarter. Yes. Now I just need to only teach things that I've worked on 25 years ago, and we'll be fine. Okay, when I started Judges, I asked you how many of you have ever studied in depth the book of Judges, and the answer was nobody really had. So I like to ask again, how many of you have ever spent an entire quarter, and this is going to be in depth because it's Sundays and Wednesdays, but how many of you have ever spent an entire quarter studying the providence of God in a class? Anybody? I wrote the material and I haven't. I think that the providence of God is a great study. It's probably a neglected study. It's a deep study, but I've never taught an entire quarter on this, and I hope that we're all going to find it beneficial. It's going to be the providence of God, or the providence of God's grace, with emphasis especially on the book of Acts. But if you look on page 2, which is the table of contents, you're going to see that more than half of it are addendums. And some of those will become classes themselves. And we're hopefully going to be expanding our study of the book of Acts and examples that I don't have. So this is not something I've ever published before, although a shortened version of it was published in a lectureship. So if you've got anything that I can improve on, or if you think it's not worth it, let me know, because it, again, is a topic not many people have studied in-depthly before. Okay, if you look on page 3, you'll see the assignment. So many of the events in Acts show that God worked providentially for the good of His people. That's one. And for the furtherance of the gospel. That's 2. And this booklet looks at some of those events and then some of the others today. But we also want to make sure that we have plenty of application for ourselves. In fact, this quarter, we are going to be finishing in the sermons the lessons on God's perfect grace, and we're going to be focuses on God's providential grace. And so that will be this morning's sermon, but I will do my best not to make sure, or to make sure that there's not too much overlap. Okay, if you look on page 3, it's got an interesting, hopefully interesting, introduction illustration. The only survivor of a shipwreck was washed up on a small, uninhabited island. He prayed feverishly for God to rescue him, and every day he scanned the horizon for help, but none seemed forthcoming. Exhausted, he eventually managed to build a little hut out of driftwood to protect himself from the elements and to store his few possessions. One day, after scavenging for food, he arrived home to find his little hut in flames, the smoke rolling up to the sky. The worst had happened. Everything was lost. He was stunned with grief and anger. And then he prays to God, cries to God, maybe screams to God, however you want to put it. God, how could you do this to me? Okay. Let's stop right there. How many of you have ever prayed to God, cried to God, or screamed to God, God, how could you do this to me? Anybody? Okay. 1, 2, 3. That's it? Okay. Well, I have. And maybe some people will think it's a lack of faith on my part, but I'm going to tell you a story before we go any further with the illustration. So stop reading and look. Janet and I were engaged. We were 20 years old, and it was in the fall, 1983. And I contracted Bell's palsy. Anybody know what Bell's palsy is? Okay. Anybody here ever have Bell's palsy? You've had Bell's palsy? No, okay. Anybody here know of anybody that's had Bell's palsy? Everybody's hand should go up because I just said I had Bell's palsy. Okay. So I, at 20 years old, had Bell's palsy. I don't know what it was like for the people that you knew who had this condition. I woke up one morning and my eyelid wouldn't close. And my mouth started to droop. As the day went on, it got worse and worse to the point where within a few hours, the right side of my face was paralyzed. Now, Jan and I were engaged, and I was a young man thinking of the possibility of becoming a preacher. And I still remember, this all happened on the same night, these two things. I went up to Janet, went over to her mother's house, and I offered her the opportunity to call off the engagement because half my face didn't work. I'm going to let you surmise from events whether she said yes or no to calling off the engagement. If she, the whole face, then she would have said, yes, we're calling it off. But she still had half of this glorious face to look at. Thank you for pointing out that distinction, Jared. I appreciate it. Even though that's not where you were going, that's where I took it. And she said, no, for better or for worse, even though it hadn't been for better or for worse officially. I walked out on the golf course where her mother and stepfather lived. And half my face isn't working. And I start screaming at God, why did you allow this to happen to me? How can I preach if I can't even speak? And I couldn't speak, hardly coherently. Food wouldn't stay in my mouth, it would just dribble out. I had to wear a patch over my eye because my eye wouldn't close. Even when I tried to sleep, it wouldn't close, it was paralyzed. When I would try to talk, certain consonants would just go brrr like that. Nobody was going to listen to me as a preacher. And I still remember walking out there and screaming at God, how could you allow this to happen? And I was so mad at the situation, I took my right hand and I slapped myself as hard as I could on the right side of my face. That was the part that was paralyzed. So maybe you've never, asked, God, how could you do this to me? Or, God, why is this happening? I know that I've gone through that. And believe it or not, to this day, it's been 42 years. There'll be times where my face just starts to droop. My eye won't close all the way or won't open all the way. And my mouth will drip like this, and Janet just says, you need to go to bed. Now, when we go back to this illustration, I know this is just a imaginary situation, but I do know that it's true for many people. God, how could this happen? Why did you allow this to happen? And we don't always find answers. That's part of God's providence. We don't always find answers. Now, did I learn anything from that experience? I have no idea, other than it became a great illustration for this class. Did God cause it to happen? Probably not. They really don't even know all the causes of Bell's palsy. They say it could be extreme stress. And I went through extreme stress because right before that happened, my grandmommy, that's what I called her, she died. And I was away at college. They also said that Bell's palsy can come from the window being left open and a breeze coming in, which means they don't know what the cause of it is. So we go back to this illustration. Even though it is imaginary, it's also real. God, how could you do this to me? And if you look at the sheet, I've got some notes. Why is it so easy to blame God every time something bad happens? One reason is it's easier to blame anyone other than ourselves. Another reason is actually paradoxical, and that is it is easy to blame God because we believe in and we respect God. It is easy to blame God because we respect not only who He is, but we respect His power and His love. And it's easy to blame God because we expect Him to stop such disasters and travesties. Now, you look at it like that, blaming God is not that unrealistic, is it? Because you believe in God, you believe God is powerful, you believe God is love, you believe that God loves you, and you wonder, why, God, are you allowing this to happen to me? So let's go back to the illustration. Early the next day, the man was awakened by the sound of a ship that was approaching the island. It had come to rescue him. How did you know I was here? The weary man asked of his rescuers. Of course, you can already see where this is going. We saw the smoke signal. What smoke signal? Because he didn't set one. But it was from his hut catching on fire. And he was rescued. It's really easy to get discouraged in our lives, and the providence of God can actually and very easily lend itself to the study of the problem of suffering, which we studied 3+ years ago when I got here. They go right along hand in hand sometimes, because it's easy to get discouraged when things in our life seem to be bad or seem to have no reason. But we should not lose heart, because God is at work in our lives, even in the midst of pain and suffering. And you could even add this, even when God is not at work in what is causing us pain and suffering, God is at work in helping us deal with pain and suffering. Does everybody see the difference between those two? God is not necessarily causing the pain and suffering. but God can help us deal with the pain and suffering. Those are two entirely different things. And so as this story ends, the one who wrote it said, remember the next time your little hut is burning to the ground, it just may be a smoke signal that summons the grace of God. That is a nice, simple, non-complex illustration of the providence of God. But as we all know, is God's providence that nice and simple and non-complex? No, it's not. We're not going to have all the answers, but we're studying a grand topic. If you look on page 4, as we continue this introduction, and let me say, while I'm thinking about it, Wednesday and next Sunday, I won't be here, but Jared and Chris are going to take the classes. So come anyway. So that's the important point. You guys are welcome to continue along the line or take any of the addendums that are there at your class to do as you want. For all the negatives we see, God has a positive answer. And again, these are, if you look at the top of page 4, these make good refrigerator magnets. They're platitudes, in a sense. We say it's impossible. God says all things are possible. Luke 18:27. We say I'm too tired. God says I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28-30. We say nobody loves me. God says I love you. John 3:16. We say I can't go on, and God says my grace is sufficient. 2 Corinthians 12:9. We say I can't figure things out. God says I will direct your steps. Proverbs 3:5-6. We say I'm not able. God says I am able. 2 Corinthians 9:8. We say I feel all alone. God says I will never leave you or forsake you. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5. And that's from a source called Church and Family. Something that I had possession of many, many years ago, but I have lost. Okay, let's just ask this question. Like I said, those make good refrigerator magnets. They're platitudes. I understand that. And some people, they really enjoy having sayings all over the house, on the refrigerators, and think. Anybody here like that? You like having spiritual sayings all through the house on your refrigerators? Okay, a few of you. Okay. Got them on the wall out there? A lot of people use them, and they're just good reminders. And sometimes they're there when we need them. When you're going through a difficult time, you can look at it and say, okay, nobody really loves me. Oh, yeah, God loves me, and God's more important than anyone. So it's important to remember these. So even though they're, like I call them, refrigerator magnets, I don't mean that in a trite way. I mean that a lot of people use these in ways that are very important. Okay, the middle of page 14. We come to the introduction. I haven't defined providence yet, and we're going to get to that. I'm just going along, maybe illustrating what it is more than anything. But if you hold this in your hand, this entire book is about God's providence. And God's providence is enumerated in places that are obvious and places that are not, from the beginning until the end. And we're going to be focusing mainly on the book of Acts when it comes to a particular book. But when we look at this, we're seeing the good that God has for his people and for the furtherance of the gospel. And in our study, and there's a lengthy overview of providence in addendum number 1, and if you go to that, you will see that somehow I printed the first 2 paragraphs back to back. I don't know how I did that. other than it's me, okay? And I'm good at making mistakes. But it's providential to keep me humble if we want to go that direction. You look at it, and here's a quote I want to share with you. The authors of the Westminster Confession, that's from the Church of England, compressed the doctrine of the Trinity into one section of 5 lines. Okay, that's not very much. But when they came to God's control over all His creatures and all their actions, they wrote 2 fairly lengthy chapters. The devout scholars who made these chapters so long must have done so under the belief, a belief fully justified, that the Bible has a great deal to say about God's sovereignty and that it is all important. And these proportions are those of the Bible. Now, when we get further in here, we're going to differentiate between how some people understand the sovereignty of God and others when we get to the extreme positions. And can you name one biblical doctrine that doesn't have extremes? I think everything that there is in the Bible, people go to one extreme or to another. And when it comes to God's sovereignty, when it comes to God's providence, there is going to be extremes on that also. I understand right now we're doing a little bit more lecturing than I like, but hopefully we are setting it up. Look at page 5. There is a theology/philosophy called the openness of God, and it's really contrary to some of the classical discussions on God and Reformed theology. But I just really liked this quote, so I thought I would include it. What kind of God created the world? Okay, this is what the providence of God is about. These are the questions. What kind of God created the world? 2, what kind of world did God create? And then those 2 questions obviously are connected with God's relationship with us based upon His character. And that is, what kind of relationship does God want to have with His world? Not just what kind of world did He create, and not just what kind of God created the world, but what kind of relationship does God want to have with the world? Over the centuries, no questions have attracted more philosophical or theological attention, stirred up more controversy, or generated more vigorous differences of opinion. The reason, of course, is that no questions are more fundamental to our understanding of who we are and what purpose our existence serves. As Christians, the answers we give to these questions influence everything we believe, and perhaps more important, have a profound impact on the way that we live. So what kind of God created the world? What kind of world did He create? What kind of relationship does He want to have with the world? Now, when we go to extremes, which will be a little bit later on, we're going to see some answers that are given here. But let me just give you a preview of an extreme. There are some Christians that believe that God doesn't really do hardly anything at all today. There was this church that, this sounds like a preacher's tale, but I knew the people who went through it, okay? There was a church that split over this. Okay, I can stop right there. The fact that you could have a hard time or easy time believing that a church split is a given, unfortunately. And they can split over easy things, or simple things, or stupid things might be the better way to put it. There was somebody in the congregation that had a terminal illness. Don't know what it was, but what is an example of a common terminal illness today? Cancer. How many of you have known somebody who had cancer? Raise your hand. Okay. Chris, you've known somebody that had cancer? I learned a long time ago, everybody knows somebody that has cancer. I've known people that have survived cancer. I've known people that have not survived cancer. There was somebody that had terminal cancer. What's terminal cancer mean? Can't survive it. Okay. How many of you have ever heard of this wild concept? Doctors can be wrong. Well, somebody was in the congregation, they had terminal cancer, and apparently somebody prayed that God would heal them of their terminal cancer. And one of the elders got up and said, the doctors have said it is terminal. God does not do miracles nowadays, so we are not going to allow any prayers that this person be healed. That is an extreme of God's non-providence. But what kind of God created the world? Okay, describe for me our God. God is love. What else? God is awesome. All-knowing, all-powerful. All-present. God is perfect. Any other descriptions of God? God can't lie. Omniscient. Anything else? Oh, you know what might be a really good study? God is. Yes, Frank. No, we don't want to go there, Frank. Maybe we should put this little sign on my door, not licensed to preach, since... Yep. It happens. It does. Okay, so God is love. God is just fill in all the isms. Omnipresent, ism, and so on and so forth. All the omnis. Okay. What kind of world did God create? Answer that one. Huh? Perfect. Everything we need. Okay. Planned out, interconnected. Beautiful. Good. Okay, now let me ask you this one question. The world created. is that world still in existence in the same way that He created it? The world that God created.
He created is still, but man has messed it up big time.
Well, man has messed it up so much so. What did God do in Genesis chapter 3 to the ground? He cursed it. We live in a world that is good, beautiful, planned, and so forth, and all those things that you said. We also live in a world that is what? Cursed. Do we have to take both of those truths into our thinking? The type of world do we live in? Yes. Okay, so what kind of God created the world? Omnipresent, powerful, all the omnis. And what kind of world did He create? He created a perfect home for us that has become cursed. This might be a silly illustration, but have you ever gone into a teenager's room? That illustrates in some ways the world that we live in. Still got four walls, still has a ceiling, still has a floor, but you might have to open up the windows. Okay. What kind of relationship does God want to have with His people? There are people that believe that God created everything and just backed away. And we'll get to that more in depth later on. But if we don't believe that, then we believe that God wants to have a closer relationship with us, and therefore we do something every single day. I pray, that's your hint, we do this every single day. What do we do every single day? Pray. She caught on. We pray every single day. Why do we pray to God every single day? We trust Him. We're thanking Him. We need Him. Janet?
He can bring about change.
Yeah, we want Him to intervene oftentimes, don't we? So we've talked about providence of God is also talking about theodicy, the problem of suffering. The problem of, the providence of God is also a study of God, a study of prayer, a study of ourselves. That's why this is such an important study, and one that I am thrilled that we could start off with. Okay, when you look at the middle of page 5, the paragraph that begins with, our study will be divided into several sections. We got thought questions, the connection between providence and faith, understanding providence, why study this subject, extreme views, an overview of the book of Acts, and along the way, there will be at the end some addendums, some special topical studies. Okay, again, I haven't defined it. We're just describing it and need to be studied. Under questions, what is providence? Then we will proceed to address more specific questions from the book of Acts. So here are some questions I want you to think about as we go through this, and feel free just to start reading the book of Acts and come up with any additional examples that are not in the book. How were Paul's persecutions accompanied by blessings? That's providence. How were Paul's persecutions themselves blessings? That's hard providence. Why was Paul born in Tarsus? Or was that just a coincidence? Why was Paul sent to preach to the Gentiles? And when did God abundantly bless, that is, provide for Paul, even in the middle or midst of all of his suffering adversity? Hopefully, when we go through that, we will discover the answers, and there's a whole lot of other questions also. You look on page 6, and This is from one of Frank's favorite writers. Frank loves Robert Turner so much, and Frank loves Hebrews so much. Frank, you don't think Robert Turner wrote Hebrews, do you? There's a pause here. Okay. I'm just joking. Did God simply make some laws and is now doing nothing? Such questions betray our failure to grasp the timeless nature of God. When we say God thought ahead, we are using accommodative language. God is, and there is no past, present, future with Him. What God provided, our past, He provides our present and will provide our future. There is no separating the laws or provisions of God from God Himself. I know nothing of the modus operandi. What does that mean? How He operates of God except as revealed in His Word, whereby I believe or trust in Him. Okay, anybody got any questions, comments, or disagreements before we go to page 7? Where we're finally going to get into defining it.
You know,
Yes, sir.
you alluded to Hebrews, but Hebrews was written to Jewish Christians who most likely had this idea that God was doing nothing in their life because they wanted to go back to the old way. They failed. I think they failed in the grace of God. It's what we finally going to see, so it's important that we meditate on these things and understand fully that God is alive and real. But it's up to us to be one with God in our studies, and that's what we're going to accomplish in this one.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, understanding providence, definition. Okay, on my imaginary board right here, I'm writing the word providence. And if you take off the last 3 letters of providence, it spells provide. Okay, so providence is God providing. Okay, so provide is right there in the word. Then you take that word provide and you divide it up. The first part, the prefix, P-R-O, doesn't mean that God is not an amateur. What does pro mean? Ahead. Yeah, it is proactive because it is ahead, it is before, it is anything that would describe looking into and being able to provide. Then we come to the next part. V-I-D-E. Okay. You can't necessarily get it as easily in this one, but you got God before can see. Think of vision. So providence is God sees beforehand and provides. That's a simple definition of providence. You look at the Greek word itself, forethought, and to know or to think. So it's a little bit different than the English. And it is actually used in Acts chapter 2, verse, excuse me. Thank you. I hope did not break anybody's eardrums with that one. Only one sneeze, Janet. I must be sick because usually I go 5. So to know beforehand, to provide. In Acts chapter, everybody just turn to Acts chapter 24, verse 2. Somebody read the King James, Acts 24 and verse 2. That would be you? Okay.
I'm a little slow around the edges.
That's all right.
Acts 24, verse 2.
Yes.
And when he was called forth to tell us, began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worth deeds are done unto this nation, by thou providence.
Okay.
And he's talking to Felix.
He is. The word provided, as you pronounce it, that's a good way to see the meaning of it, or providence, as it is also pronounced, is only one time in the King James Version. And it's not even in reference to God. But when we use the word providence, we almost now exclusively use it of God. That's kind of like a curiosity. Everybody turn to Romans chapter 13, verse 14. Romans chapter 13 and verse 14. Well, I think I got the wrong verse there. Okay. Won't you go ahead and read it for me, please? Yes. Oh, King James again. Okay, now, providence and provision, you can see those same words in the CSV or CSB back in Acts chapter 24. It used the word foresight. So providence, foresight. And here in Romans chapter 13 and verse 14, to make plans. So when you make plans, you are preparing for the future. And that is a basic understanding of what it is. And you look in history, if you see the quote by Gareth Rees, the Greek word rendered providence had in the first century almost the connotation of divine action. Men spoke then as now of the providence of God, and already in the Roman Empire there was a tendency to attribute such divine actions to the emperor himself. In time, because men had spoken so much of the providence of Caesar. Those words will appear on the coins and medals struck in Caesar's honor. And that is one reason why Tertullus probably used it in reference to Felix governing. But we can see, even in our English word, that it is the idea of providing for. And our time is up. So we will finish application of definition and stop there. Anybody got any questions or comments or disagreements? Now, I'm going to ask you to help me with something. I have a tendency to make things more technical than applicable. It's a gift. So feel free to interrupt me, make applications, help me ask, how does that apply? Because while I find the technical aspect of it interesting and I'm applying things in my head, that doesn't mean that I'm getting it out. Yes.